All right, let's go ahead and get started. Good afternoon. So today you had the Islamic theology online homework assignment that was due by the start of class, so right now, 3:05. And then you have another assignment that is due by the start of class on Thursday, and that is response paper number 2. So please review the response paper instructions on the Moodle class website, and the topics you may write a response to this time around are either my Women and Islam lecture, my Islamic theology lecture, or today's lecture on family and festivals. You may not write a response to any other topics other than those. And remember once again that this is indeed a response paper. It is not a research paper. And it is not a summation of my own lecture back to me, okay? So I don't want to see a paper where you're just writing my lecture notes back to me in your own words. That's not the point of this paper. I want to understand your thoughts, your insights, your questions about the course material, all right? So that'll be due at the start of class on Thursday. And for Thursday, I also want you to read the article in the assigned readings folder called The Emergence of the Islamic World System. So that article will get us prepared to discuss what's called the gunpowder empires on Thursday. The Arab Islamic Empire comes to an end in the 13th century, and in the ensuing centuries, we will see the emergence of 3 great new Islamic empires, which are not ruled by Arab dynasties. Instead, they are, broadly speaking, Turkic dynasties, although they are different depending on the region, and this article will help lay the foundation for that lecture on Thursday. I'll also give you your study guide, or I'll post it on the Moodle class website on Thursday, because exam 2 is coming up. It is 1 week from this Thursday, and it is a more difficult exam than the first exam. Right? First exam, I'm asking you questions like, what is the pilgrimage to Mecca called, and things like that. We're beyond that now. So we're grappling with more difficult material. But obviously, based on the fact that I only have 7 students out of the 27 enrolled, most of the class isn't worried about the difficulty of the exam. So we'll see how that works out for them. But yeah, study and prepare. Okay, so with that said, let's go ahead and dive into today's lecture. Students generally seem to like this lecture, I guess because it's easy to relate to holidays and festivals and stuff like that. So people tend to take some interest in this lecture. So let's go ahead and dive in. So when we think about the Islamic tradition, there are 2 core main holidays, holy days, festival days. And these days are called Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha. So the Arabic word Eid, which begins with the letter Ain, so it's sort of pronounced unusually for an English speaker. Eid means feast or festival. And you can see that that word shows up in the titles of both of these special days. The first one here, Eid al-Fitr, means the feast of the breaking of the fast. And as we know, one of the 5 pillars of Islam, one of the things that Muhammad specified in the hadith of Gabriel, when Gabriel asks him, what is Islam? One of the things that the Prophet cited was fasting in the month of Ramadan. And Ramadan is the 9th month of the Islamic lunar calendar. And so after you fasted for that period of 29 or 30 days, depending on the phases of the moon, well, then it's time to celebrate with lots of feasting. And so that is Eid al-Fitr. And here you can see a contemporary online sort of greeting card saying Eid al-Fitr Mubarak. So have a blessed Eid al-Fitr. That's what it says in Arabic on the top there as well. Then we have another Eid, Eid al-Adha. This is the feast of the sacrifice. So Eid al-Adha occurs during the Hajj, begins on the 3rd day of the Hajj. The Hajj occurs in the month of Dhul Hijjah, which means possessor of the pilgrimage, possessor of the Hajj. And this feast commemorates the substitution of a ram in place of Abraham's son, a story that we first find in the Torah, first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible or Tanakh. So you notice that I didn't specify actual dates here. And that's because when it comes to determining the dates of these events, you use the phases of the moon. You use the Islamic lunar calendar, and so it doesn't line up with our solar Gregorian calendar that we use here in the United States. So they don't match up perfectly. They change every year. A lunar year, on average, is 11 days shorter than a solar year. So the dates of Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha, as well as the month of Ramadan and so forth, will change by about 11 days every year, sometimes in the winter, but after a while, it'll end up in the summer. I see someone has a question here. Steve says, can you check your camera? It seems unusually blurry today, and I don't know if that is the camera or the streaming. Can anyone else comment and tell me whether or not the camera is blurry to them? I will try wiping off the camera lens. Let's see if this helps. Let's see. Is that any better? Matthew says it did improve. What do you think, Steve? Is it better? Okay, I'll give it one more. Give it one more rub here and see. Yeah, it's completely possible that there was a fingerprint on it because it's right there at the top. Okay, I think it's better. Let's angle it like that. Madison says, no, the screen looks pixelated. Well, the screen that I'm seeing on my computer, because I can see my own image and it looks good from my perspective. Steve says to try and increase the video quality in the playback. Maybe that will help. All right, well, I apologize if the video quality isn't coming through very well, but what you can do is watch this video back. So it'll automatically save on YouTube. And so we'll see, I think the saved version will probably be okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and continue because I do have a student here in person as well. So we'll go through the lecture and you can try watching the recording if you're unable to watch the live stream, okay? All right. So here's a list of the 12 months of the Islamic lunar calendar. So we have 12 months, and these are based on the phases of the moon, right? So you've all heard of a new moon before, right? So the new moon begins a month, whereas the full moon marks the midway point of a month. The first month of the Islamic lunar calendar is Muharram. Now, that might sound familiar to you because it was on the 10th day in the month of Muharram that Imam Hussein was killed at Karbala in the year 680. Right, that tragic event that is so important in Shia Islam. Well, the first day in the month of Muharram is New Year's Day in the Islamic lunar calendar. You see here we have the 9th month, the important month of fasting, Ramadan, which is also the month in which Muhammad gets the first revelation of the Quran, Surah 96 in the Uthmanic Codex, the official Quran that we have today, at least the first 5 verses. And then the 12th month is called Dhul Hijjah. It says the Hijjah, it should say Dhul. This is the month of the pilgrimage to Mecca. And so this is the month when Eid al-Adha occurs. And the first day of Shawwal, which follows Ramadan, is the first day of Eid al-Fitr. So let's take a closer look at both of those holidays. First, Eid al-Fitr. So that's the common Arabic name for it, but another term that shows up in some countries for this is Bayram or Eid al-Bayram. I think Bayram is favored in Turkey. I think they tend to use that name, but I go by the classical Arabic name. So Eid al-Fitr occurs at the conclusion of Ramadan. So it also marks the start of the next month. And what do you do after you've been fasting, abstaining from food and drink for 29 or 30 days? Well, it's time to eat, as you can imagine. Of course, you do get to eat during Ramadan. You eat when the when the sun is down, you eat at nighttime. But for the first time now, you can feast all day if you want to. And so people will prepare big meals and get together with family and friends, share food with neighbors and others. There is a special alms that people will pay, zakat al-fitr. So we know that one of the 5 pillars of Islam is zakat, giving 2.5% of your annual wealth. Well, for both of the Eids, there is an additional alms that you are encouraged to pay, and that will go towards the needy so that they too can partake in the holiday and feast and have some enjoyment. And there is a special prayer that is performed. Now, this prayer doesn't replace any of the 5 daily prayers. It actually occurs after the sun rises. So the first of the 5 daily prayers is at dawn. And then the next one would be at midday, at noon. So the Salat al-Eid occurs right after sunrise. So maybe around, depends on the time of year, but let's say 7:30 in the morning or something like that, 8 o'clock in the morning. And for the Eid prayer, it's a little bit different. One of the things that is done is ideally the Eid prayer is performed outside. And the reason why it's performed outside is because you want as many members of the community as possible to pray together. And so if you're outside, that means you have lots of space. Now you can do it inside, that's fine, do it in a mosque. That's certainly true, if it's raining or something like that, then it can be performed in the masjid, in the mosque, but obviously you're dealing with the constraints of that physical space. So if possible, it should be done outside so you can get as many people as possible. And that means that some communities will rent stadiums, open air stadiums, or large athletic fields, like a football field, let's say, so that you can have as many people as possible. There's no adhan. The adhan is the call to prayer that tells people when to do the 5 daily prayers. But for this prayer, there's no adhan. There's some other changes, such as the recitation of multiple takbirs. Takbir is the formula Allahu Akbar, which is said at the start of the 5 daily prayers. But for the Eid prayer, it's said multiple times. So there are some differences there, but you still go through the bowing and the sujood and so forth. There may also be a special sermon given by the imam after the prayer. And in modern times, you have all the kind of commercialization that you would find in other religious traditions. So you have greeting cards that people purchase and send out to family and friends and loved one, and people buy gifts and get presents for kids. All those types of modern, consumer dimensions are present in the contemporary practice of these Muslim festivals. Here we can see some photographs of the Eid prayer taking place. Notice that in these images, it's all outside. Okay, so that's the ideal. You want as many people as possible. This one is from the US. So you can see here, it looks like they're on a farm, right? So they're in a big meadow. You can see that the men and the women are in separate rows in accordance with Orthodox custom. This is an image from Indonesia, and this is a women's section. So these are all lines of women. You can see that there are some colorful balloons along with the lines of worshipers. And then down here, I'm not 100% certain where this photo is from. I do see a McDonald's sign, but of course McDonald's is everywhere now, so that doesn't really help. You can see here that they're using a stadium. And so you have this massive crowd. The imam is standing up here, and there's a microphone and a PA system so the people in the back can hear, the various takbirs and so forth and follow along in the prayer. I have a video clip here that I want to share with you. It's a few years old now, but it's going to give you a glimpse of the celebration of Eid al-Fitr in a few different countries.
Muslims around the world are celebrating Eid al-Fitr from Thursday, marking the end of Ramadan. Palestinians in Jerusalem gathered for morning prayers. The holy month of fasting is now followed by a festival lasting several days. In France, the Great Mosque of Paris intervened to settle a disagreement over the start date for Ramadan. There was no such debate over the end, as thousands turned out for Eid. Thousands of kilometers to the east, in the Russian region of Tatarstan, they're also celebrating. It's traditional for Muslims to demonstrate unity, often forgiving old wrongs and giving money to the poor. It's also forbidden to fast, and so food is specially prepared for the occasion, with friends and relatives invited to share the feast. In Egypt, the traditional treats are cookies made with nuts and sugar. This year, the country's political crisis has overshadowed the festival, and shops have reported poor trade. In Bangladesh, millions of people left the capital Dhaka to return to their hometowns to celebrate with families and friends. Trains and ferries were jam-packed, but most still found a way to get on board somehow.
That doesn't look safe at all. So Eid al-Fitr is the first, and then the second major Eid is Eid al-Adha, which, as I told you, is the feast of the sacrifice. So the sacrifice in question there is in reference to the traditional story of Abraham, which is known to Jews, Christians, and Muslims. In the Quran, the story of Abraham being told by God to go and sacrifice his son, the Quranic story doesn't actually specify the identity of the son. So in the Torah, in the Bible, the son is Isaac. But given the importance of Ishmael, the firstborn son of Abraham, through Hagar, in Islam, that he's considered to be the patriarch of the Arabs, that he's an ancestor of Muhammad, in the Islamic account, the son is typically Ishmael. But again, the Quran doesn't specify that. That is the common Muslim view, though. So this commemorates that story. And in commemoration of the substitution of the ram in place of Abraham's son, the heads of Muslim households will have a ram, a sheep, a camel, a cow, some type of traditional livestock slaughtered, and then the meat is used to prepare the feast for this occasion. And traditionally, you would keep 1/3 for yourself, your family, give another third to friends and extended family members, and then another third could be given to the poor and the needy. So for people who are undertaking the pilgrimage, this festival begins on the third day of the pilgrimage. The pilgrimage occurs, the Hajj, occurs over a span of 5 days. And so this begins on the third day. And once you get to the third day, all the most important events of the Hajj, all the pilgrimage rituals have been done. There's 2 more days of it, so you might make more tawaf around the Kaaba or something like that, but really the third day is sort of the ritual climax of the Hajj. And both Eids can be marked over a span of 3 days. It's commonly said that the Eid lasts for 3 days, but the first day of Eid al-Fitr is the most important. The first day of Eid al-Adha is similarly important. Beyond that, we've got another Eid prayer, just like for Eid al-Fitr, ideally outdoors. You have, gift giving going on once again. You have greeting cards and all that sort of traditional holiday fanfare as well. Theologically, Eid al-Adha is considered to be the big Eid. It's the most important of the holidays. It's the most sacred. But I will tell you that the most popular is definitely Eid al-Fitr. And I think that's simply for the reason that, unlike this one, Eid al-Fitr comes at the end of Ramadan, where everyone's been fasting, right? Everyone's been going through this trial, and finally they made it through. It's over. I think there's an extra excitement and exuberance to that. It also occurs before this one, so it's the first holiday, right? It occurs at the start of the 10th month. This one occurs in the 12th month. So once you get here, you've already had Eid al-Fitr. So Eid al-Fitr is more popular. It's sort of like in Christianity, Easter is by far theologically the most important holy day, by far. But Christmas is the most popular, right? Because you've got the gift giving and people like the winter festival sort of stuff, the decorations and everything. So similarly, Eid al-Adha is a bigger deal, but Eid al-Fitr is more popular. Here we can see some photographs of families who have acquired livestock. In this case, we've got a cow over here. We've got a sheep or a ram, and these animals will, in some contexts, they take them to the butcher shop, right? So the butcher can officially prepare the meat. Depending on where you live, though, you might, the head of the household, especially if you have a farm, might do that himself. But otherwise, you can take the animal to the butcher shop. So when I lived in Cairo, I lived right in the middle of the city. It's a big city. And I lived in this apartment building that was like 16 stories high. And if you went into the stairwell, I, of course, took the elevator to get to my apartment, but you could look down the stairwell and actually, if you leaned over the rail, you could see all the way down through all the levels into the basement. And while I was there, when it got to be Eid al-Adha, I can't remember why I was in the stairwell, but I looked down there and there was actually a live cow wandering around down there because a particular family had purchased this cow for Eid al-Adha that they would then take to the butcher shop, even in the middle of the city, right? It wasn't like I was living on a farm on the outskirts of the city. I was right in the middle. But yeah, so livestock can show up in funny places once it's Eid al-Adha. Here we can see the sacrifice taking place. So the animals have been slaughtered according to the traditional slaughtering method of you cut the throat just like in a kosher butcher shop and try to drain out as much blood as possible so that the meat is halal. And here we can see some of the celebrations. And of course, the centerpiece of the celebrations is the feast itself on the meat. And keep in mind that, in pre-modern times, having meat was much more of a delicacy. Like in Muhammad's own life, Muhammad, like the food that he ate on a day-to-day basis would be like bread. And there's hadiths about him dipping the bread in vinegar. Very simple. Dates, of course, camel's milk. That's kind of like the day-to-day stuff that you would eat. And then for a special occasion, or if a guest has arrived, you want to show hospitality, or there's a wedding or something like that, then you would slaughter the animal and prepare the meat. So today, the way that like Americans in the 21st century will have meat every day, often 3 meals a day and things like that, that's just historically, that's definitely not the norm for humanity as a whole, but certainly not in the Muslim community either. So meat would have been a bigger deal way back in the 7th century. And of course, every culture in all these different parts of the world, they have their own unique recipes and traditional foods that would be prepared for the occasions. And it would differ, just like when you think about the feast that Christians have to celebrate Easter or Christmas, depending on what country you're in, there might be different types of traditional dishes that are prepared for those events as well. Now let's talk about another holiday that's a little more controversial. It's definitely not as popular. So Eid al-Adha and Eid al-Fitr are universals. These are things that are like standard Muslim holy days that all Muslims will acknowledge. This one is a little trickier. This is called Mawlid al-Nabi, which means the birthday of the prophet. So this is Muhammad's birthday. And we don't actually know 100% for certain what day he was born on. According to the Sunni sources, he was born on the 12th of Rabi al-Awwal, but according to the Shia sources, he was born on the 17th. So depending on which sect of Islam, they believe he had a different birthday. And so those who observe Mawlid al-Nabi, if you're Sunni, you celebrate it on one day. If you're Shia, on another. Now, of course, we don't know what day Jesus was born on either, right? December 25th was a choice of the church in like the 4th century. And Orthodox Christians celebrated, I think, on January 7th, whereas Western Christians celebrate on December 25th. So it's not that unusual, but it's just an interesting additional difference between the Sunni and the Shia, that they can't even agree on the birth date of Muhammad. So the birthday of Muhammad is most popular among Muslims who already have a pre-existing tradition of venerating holy people, of saint veneration. So who does that? Well, we talked about saints in my lectures on Sufism. So we know that Muslim mystics have a well-established tradition of venerating holy men and holy women who are thought to have a special connection to God. And then after they die, you visit their tombs, and you might get barakah, blessings from them. So Sufis tend to celebrate Mawlid al-Nabi. Shia Muslims also, it's very common for Shia Muslims to celebrate Mawlid al-Nabi. And in fact, they'll celebrate the birthdays of the holy imams as well. So in Sufism and in Shia Islam, you have this existing veneration of holy people, of saints, and this day is more popular in those circles. Now, that said, Mawlid al-Nabi is also celebrated by Sunni Muslims who don't identify as being Sufi. And this is certainly true in Egypt. And Egypt, I will say that traditional Sunni Islam in Egypt has a lot of Sufi influence, even among people who don't identify as Sufis and aren't members of any brotherhoods, aren't a member of a tariqah, for example. There's still like these elements of tasawwuf or Sufism. It's even part of like the standard curriculum at Al-Azhar University, which is like the preeminent Sunni Muslim institution of learning. So you see it there, but it's not everywhere. And for those who do celebrate it, you have feasting, just like for the two Eids. You have gift giving, just like the two Eids. But you also have singing songs of praise of the Prophet. And there's a great variety of musical traditions in the Muslim majority world. We talked about some of that in my discussion of Sufism. I talked to you about Qawwali, which is a type of mystical music, most commonly found among the Chishti Sufis of South Asia. But there are other forms of devotional music in Islam as well. And so this is an ideal time to sing songs of praise of the Prophet on this day that celebrates his birth. And I went and updated my slide yesterday to look at when the next Mawlid Nabi, according to the Sunni tradition, is going to occur in our calendar, and that will be October 28th. October 28th, so we're not far away from the Mawlid Nabi. And remember, that's a lunar calendar, so next year it'll change. So Muhammad wasn't born on October 28th because it's based on the phases of the moon. So it'll change moving forward. But why is this holiday controversial? It seems reasonable to celebrate the birth of the founder of your religious tradition. Well, it's controversial because we know that in the Sunni tradition in particular, there's this emphasis on following the example of the Prophet, following his sunnah. And there's no record of Muhammad celebrating his birthday. He celebrated Eid al-Fitr, he celebrated Eid al-Adha. He did not celebrate his own birthday. So if that's the case, the argument could be made, Muslims shouldn't celebrate his birthday either. And they would describe it as a form of bid'ah, that is an innovation, something that later Muslims added to the religion that aren't based in the founding teachings of the Prophet. So for some Sunni Muslims, they say, look, it's not part of the Sunnah, it's not in the Quran, it's not specified in the Quran, doesn't say that we should celebrate this, so it has no basis, it has no legitimate basis. And that's an important concern for some forms of Islam, especially once you get to the modern period. You have various reform movements that are trying to, quote unquote, purify Islam of what they see as corruptions of the religion, to try and restore, to try and go back to some imagined sense of a pure 7th century form of Islam. But of course, they're coming up with this understanding of Islam in the 19th or 20th or 21st century. One movement that would actively reject the celebration of Mawlid al-Nabi is the sect that formed around the teachings of an 18th century preacher named Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, and he died in 1792. And it's his thought that would form the sect that outsiders commonly refer to as Wahhabism. And Wahhabism would become the state sect or state religion of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia when it was formed in 1932. So for the Saudi religious authorities, they don't accept the legitimacy of Mawlid al-Nabi. But if you were to, for example, then go from Saudi to Iran, where the state religion is 12 or Shia Islam, Mawlid al-Nabi is a big deal. It's an important holy day. Now, I'm going to jump back and show you this video clip. So this clip shows you some Sunni Muslims and some Sufis celebrating Mawlid al-Nabi in Cairo.
Not all Muslims mark the Prophet Muhammad's birthday, but here in Egypt, days of celebrations are held. Mosques and streets in Cairo are bathed in light for the anniversary. Special tasty treats can be found, and to honor the Prophet, food is given to the poor. It's a time for coming together as a community. On this day, we communicate with friends and relatives. The whole family meet with each other in this atmosphere of joy on the occasion of the birth of the Prophet Muhammad. We are very happy about the Prophet Muhammad's birth. In Egypt and in the world, we feel reborn as Muslims. One of the most important Islamic celebrations in Egypt. Many see this as an opportunity to proclaim and rejoice at the Prophet's teachings. For Sufi Muslims, a display of singing and dancing demonstrates their devotion. Our correspondent says the message of those celebrating here this year is the rejection of violence and terrorism which is practiced in the name of Islam, emphasizing the values of love and tolerance which the Prophet Muhammad called for.
من أمام مسجد الحسين في القاهرة محمد شيخ إبراهيم ليورونيوز.
So the reporter there was standing outside the mosque of Sayyidina Hussein. So that's the great mosque in Cairo that has a shrine that's said to have the head of Imam Hussein. So after Hussein died at Karbala, the Umayyad army took his head back to Yazid, the caliph in Damascus. The tradition is later that it gets entombed in Damascus, but then there's two different stories about how the head of Hussein as well as the body of his sister Zainab end up in Cairo. One is that Salahuddin or Saladin moves it to protect it from the Crusaders who are advancing into Syria. But another explanation is that the Fatimids, right, that Ismaili Shia dynasty moved it to Cairo. Which one is correct or whether or not it's actually there, it's kind of up in the air. But I've been to that particular mosque and you can see how crowded it was there because, of course, that's Muhammad's grandson. So an opportune time to visit his shrine in Cairo. So another Islamic holiday, but one that is relatively minor, is the celebration of the Islamic New Year. So if you have a separate reckoning of time, you've got a different calendar, then you have an opportunity to celebrate the start of a different new year. As I've already described, it's based on the phases of the moon. So yeah, you've got 12 months in the Islamic year, but the lunar calendar produces a year that is 11 days shorter than the solar Gregorian year. So right now, according to what's called the Hijri calendar, Hijri because year one is the year of the Hijra, when Muhammad and the Muslims left Mecca and went to Medina, it is currently the year 1442. All right. And for the calendar that we use here, which is the solar Gregorian calendar, it's the year 2020, but our current calendar that we use actually was adopted in 1582 to replace the earlier Julian calendar. And then if we go by the Hebrew calendar, which is also a lunar calendar, but it's the lunar calendar that resets to roughly align with the solar calendar, the year is 5,780. So there's lots of different ways of calculating time, but in the Islamic tradition, we have the Hijri year, which is 1442. So another important event that is celebrated in Muslim societies is marriage. And marriage is a big deal in Islam. Islam does not encourage celibate asceticism. It strongly discourages fornication, that is sex outside of marriage, but Muslims are encouraged to go and get married so that those natural human urges, human sexuality is part of human nature, have an outlet, a safe, a halal way to channel those interests, that energy, and not, cause problems in society. And this is really emphasized in the Quran, but there's lots of hadiths to this effect as well. One of the most famous hadiths that it's hyperbolic, but it does a good job of encouraging and explaining the significance of marriage is this one, where the Prophet is reported to have said that marriage is half your deen, it's half your religion. It's hyperbolic, but you get the point. So it's that important. And there are other hadiths that explain the importance of marriage in other ways. So how do people find spouses? If you are, let's say, a 22-year-old Muslim man, you've just finished college, you've got your first job, you've got an apartment now, you're sort of ready to start your life. How do you go about finding a partner? Well, in the 21st century, there's an enormous variety of ways, including the types of ways that Americans find partners, dating and so forth, but that would not be the traditional halal approach, right? Because what you would want to do is try to avoid fornication, and any other inappropriate physical contact with women outside of marriage. That would be sinful behavior. And when I gave my lecture on Sharia, I talked about how jurists will generally forbid behaviors that could lead to sin. Okay, so that might be for some conservative jurists that if fornication, if sex outside of marriage is haram, is forbidden, then a man and a woman shouldn't be like alone together, in the apartment having a romantic dinner, right? Even if you say, but they're responsible, they're not going to engage in fornication. Okay, but will they be strong enough to fight off that temptation? So conservative jurists will say, don't be alone together, right? Don't put yourself in that tempting situation. And so sort of discourage that kind of interaction as well. So some Muslims will avoid kind of the American Western style of dating and go the traditional route. And the traditional route is an arranged courtship. Now, when I say arranged marriage, or when anyone says arranged marriage, oftentimes Americans think of like two people being forced to marry each other. That's not what I'm talking about here. Now, there could definitely be instances where people are forced and sort of steered into a marriage through various types of social pressure, but that's not what generally speaking, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the way in which people find each other and agree to a contractual marriage. So families will be a part of this process. If you have, this 22-year-old, he's finished college, he's got his job, he's got an apartment, he talks to his family, his parents, reach out to other parents, reach out to the community, maybe at the mosque, maybe at people they know from work or in the neighborhood. And do they know of a young woman who's also seeking a spouse? Oh, there's this 23-year-old who also graduated from college and is seeking a spouse. Okay, well, let's learn about that person. Do we know that family? Oh, we like that family. They have good standing in the community. Okay, if all those things, sort of all the boxes are checked, well, then you would arrange a meeting. The families meet and the two young people who are seeking spouses would also meet, and they can talk, but of course in a group setting, right? Not alone in a romantic, date or something like that. Some kind of halal setting, and people can factor in lots of things, right? Do they get along? Yes. Do they have similar goals in life about family, how many kids, career, all those types of things? Do they follow the same form of Islam, right? Are they both Sunni? If they're both Sunni, are they both Malikis? Are they Salafis, right? All these different factors can be considered. And then if everything looks good and they're interested in going forward, then terms are set in a marriage contract. And a marriage contract can hypothetically include anything. So if the bride said, as a dowry, I want a Porsche, I want a sports car. Hypothetically, you could put that in the terms of the contract. Now, maybe that will turn off the other party to the contract, but various terms can be stipulated. And then there is a publicly acknowledged wedding. And the centerpiece of the wedding ceremony is the signing of the contract. And so here you can see a bride, she's signing the marriage contract. And then one of the stipulations that will be included in the marriage contract is the dowry being the gift that the groom has to give to the bride. And that could be anything from some jewelry, a small sum of money, to something far more elaborate. One of the things that's happening right now in countries like Egypt is brides, and probably most of all their families, are making major demands of would-be grooms about what their dowry will consist of. And this has caused a problem because it means that the marriage can't take place until the groom has acquired those things. So let's say they specify that the bride should get a house fully equipped with the latest appliances and a car and all those things. And then the groom, who might be at an early stage in his career, has to work for many years to get the money and to buy all those things before the marriage can take place. So there's a situation right now where people are not actually getting married until they're much, much older because of the terms of the contract. And many religious scholars have spoken out against this. They're saying, you're missing the point here. You should get married early so that you don't engage in fornication. right? The whole point is to prevent you from sinning as a halal acceptable channel for human sexuality. So if you're delaying the marriage contract, then you might be drawn to engage in incorrect, sinful behavior. So various religious sheikhs have said, no. The dowry shouldn't be this whole elaborate thing. It should be very simple, but that has become an issue. So let's take a look at a video about a young Muslim woman. She happens to be in Britain, and she's college educated. She's at a point in her life where she's ready to find a spouse. And so she turns to her mom and they begin their search. And so you'll get a sense of what it's like to try and find a Muslim spouse. This becomes all the more important for a Muslim living in as a minority in a country like Britain or like the United States. If you live in a Muslim majority country, then most of the people you interact with on a day-to-day basis are Muslims. And if you come across any single people, well, then they're probably Muslim too. But let's say you're in a country where Muslims make up 2%, 5% of the population. It's a little trickier there. So let's take a look at this video.
Nyla is a traditional Muslim accountancy student from London. Although she loves taking risks in her free time, when it comes to finding a husband, she wants to do everything strictly by the book and have an arranged marriage.
Like everything else in life, this sounds crazy, but why would you like to know? Muslim girls are for rent, you've got to buy it.
Nyla's the eldest girl in the family. Now she's 22, it's time to find her a husband.
Arranged marriages, especially if your mum's arranging it, it's like blind date, I guess, but your mum's still a black.
Although her mum's arranging her marriage, Nyla is allowed to say if she doesn't like someone.
She's trusting me, so I have to fulfill my responsibility.
She's like the first hurdle, so it means that if she feels that somebody is suitable, then I then kind of have the opportunity to make my own mind up.
It's been a few weeks since Nyla's mum began the search for a husband. A family friend has given her the number of a possible match. If he's going to get a meeting with Nyla, he needs to impress her mum on the phone first.
At this stage, it's literally just a stranger's number, so she would speak to them and get to know sort of what they're about, really. If she feels that that's somebody that could kind of belong in this family. Did you have a gut feeling?
Yes.
Or, yeah.
My concern is he hasn't got the education.
So for you, education is.
Would you like to live the person who's working in a cash and carry till?
That's fine.
I'm not dissing anyone.
Yeah, but you are dissing someone.
Well, it's up to you. If you want to live your life, you haven't got any experience of life. That's why you are just laughing and making jokes on it. I'm your mother and I know your personality. And if I say yes and things go further on, you would be the one who will turn around and will say, Mom, you have done this to me. So, yeah.
All right. Yeah, fair enough. Point taken. Mom's always no better, right?
Finding the perfect match for her daughter is proving a tricky business. And Nyla's mum has called in extra help. Today, a Muslim matchmaker has come to visit.
How old is Nyla now?
She's 22.
22, mashallah. How tall is she? She looks very tall to me.
She's 5'6".
5'6", mashallah. Oh, God. How far she go to finish her degree yet?
Still
2 years. Okay. So it's not looking now.
Yeah.
It takes time, really, Some people have been registered for me for 3 years, but they're so fussy they couldn't find somebody yet.
I suppose there's always a spark, that you're going to love somebody.
The matchmaker's daughter, Nigar, had an arranged marriage 3 years ago.
But there is a spark.
There definitely is a connection and a spark,
Yeah.
Otherwise you wouldn't get married in the first place, that person.
She's doing finance.
For traditional Muslims, even arranging a first meeting can take months.
Would you think Naila would like somebody to be on the same sort of job side, like accountant, would you prefer?
Same field, then they do understand each other.
You need to be very relaxed about it as well, obviously not take it to heart if there is any sort of rejection from each side.
Yeah, can you imagine? So if you see one person, you're like, nah. Next person, nah. Third one, maybe not. Fourth one, this is the one, this is the one, this is the one. And then, nah, from the other side.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to see you.
I'm just sort of getting used to it kind of thing. I mean, I've seen all my friends and family kind of going through it. So you think you know what it's about, but you really don't until it kind of knocks on your door and the process begins.
Right, so that clip gives you a sense of how these arrangements take place in modern times, especially in minority communities where, again, it's a little bit trickier to find someone. I do a lecture on marriage and dating in the American Muslim community for my Islam in America class. And one of the things that has developed among the American Muslim community is various types of Muslim-specific dating apps and other websites. And oftentimes, the sites aren't actually dating apps or dating sites, they're matrimonial sites, right? That everyone there is looking specifically to get married rather than looking for someone to date. Now, there are some that are about dating, and certainly Muslims who date non-Muslims and all those sorts of things as well. But for some people, it's important just to, find a spouse of the same religion and have a Muslim family and all those types of things. So when it comes to marriage, another practice that we find in various parts of the Muslim majority world are endogamous marriage. So endogamy means that when you select a spouse, you're selecting someone within a particular more immediate community. So that could be if you live in a society that still retains the idea of tribes, then you want to find someone who's from the same tribe as you, or the same clan, or that could also be from the same extended family as you. And so that would mean marrying a cousin, for example. In some societies, this is quite common. I'll show you a chart in a moment, but in that chart, it notes that about half of the marriages that occur in Pakistan today are endogamous, half. And so that differs depending on what country. The idea of marrying people within your extended family or a more immediate sort of community like a tribe is something that was quite common in the pre-modern world. It seems very unusual and very, very strange for Americans, but think about a time in which people are living on farms or spread out towns where people have lived for generations, and it happens that basically everyone within that town has some kind of family relationship to you, that this person is your distant cousin and this one over here and by marriage and so forth. And so when it comes time for people to find spouses, the people in your immediate environment may indeed have some kind of connection to your family. But why would people, even in modern times, with modern transportation and big bustling cities with millions of people, why would people still choose an endogamous marriage over marrying someone who is a complete stranger? Well, one reason is because families are able to keep wealth and property within the family. So I talked before about the idea of a dowry, that the groom gives a gift to the bride, and how the bride's family might be playing a role in dictating the terms of the dowry. Well, think about that. If you've worked hard and you've raised this money that you're going to give to the bride, that money could leave you and your family and go off into this other group. But if, for example, you have a marriage taking place between cousins, then that money is still staying within the family or within the particular tribe, whatever the community is that we're talking about. There's a greater familiarity with the honor, with the reputation of the other person who's a party to the marriage. So if you say, well, I met so-and-so a year ago. I've never met their family or her parents, but we're really in love. We're going to go to Vegas and get married. We're going to get eloped. okay, I'm being a little silly there, but you don't know where she comes from or what her family's like or those types of things. But if they're from your community, your tribe, your clan, your extended family, then there's less concern about that. And so there is this perception then that an endogamous marriage offers greater stability, less conflict between in-laws, and a greater chance of success. Because even though divorce is permissible in Islam, it is discouraged, right? There's this hadith where the Prophet says, of all the things that Allah has made permissible, he hates divorce the most. So if you can, try and avoid divorce. So if a marriage isn't endogamous, then one term for a marriage, the way we would generally think of it here in the United States, is a stranger marriage, right? That you don't have any connection to the spouse's family or community. And some people consider that to be a riskier marriage, one that is more prone to result in divorce. Marriage, of course, historically also has served as a way in which to unite families. So in that case, you may want completely separate families who have no ties to each other because it forms an alliance. So for example, when you read about Muhammad's marriages in Medina, not only were they all widows, except for Aisha bint Abu Bakr, but most of them also created alliances. That is, with Muhammad marrying this particular woman, then he has this family tie to her tribe or to her family. And of course, when you watch movies about kingdoms and things like that, think about how princes and princesses are married off, right? That there's this politics going on. So marriages can also serve as a way to create kinship, to create alliances, and to forge social bonds between people. So here's a chart looking at the percentage of marriages in just 6, right? There's 50 Muslim majority countries in the world. We've only got 6 here. It would have been nicer to have a longer list. But we do have some interesting data here that looks at what percentage of marriages are endogamous. So you can see in Egypt, Morocco, a quarter of marriages are endogamous. But up in Pakistan, still has very strong tribal groups, especially Western Pakistan, 50%. I'm really surprised by this number, 36% in Tunisia. Tunisia, when it comes to women's rights and society as a whole, it's probably the most progressive in the Arab world, at least. So that traditional preference for endogamy is surprising there. This chart is something else. This is about the number of children, but you can see some changes in birth rates over a span of about 50 years, this significant decrease in these various countries. So we talked a little bit about polygamy before. We talked about polygamy with regards to Muhammad, that the Arabs were already polygamous. Polygamy existed among the Jews as well. Christianity would conform to Roman social norms, and in the Roman Empire, while people had concubines, they didn't have more than one wife. So in Christianity, for the most part, Christianity would be a tradition of monogamy. But in Islam, polygamy would continue with some restrictions. So in Surah number 4, we have this verse that says, if you fear that you will not deal justly with the orphan girls, then marry those women that please you 2 or 3 or 4. But if you fear that you will not be just, then 1. So this verse, the 3rd verse in Surah 4, is the basis for Muslim polygamy. That the ulama, the scholars interpreting this in their formulations of Sharia, say that it is permissible for a Muslim man to marry up to 4 women at once, maximum of 4. But notice the second half of the verse. If you fear that you will not be just, then just 1. So that's where we get tricky. So some scholars would say the Quranic ideal is monogamy, but with it being permissible for a man to marry up to 4, under the condition that he has, the financial means to provide each of them with equal treatment. So if one wife has a house and these things, all, the other 3, or the second wife or the third, has to have the same things. Now, for most men, that wouldn't be possible. And in fact, if you continue reading Surah 4, 100 verses later in that surah, there's a verse that says, no matter how hard you try, you will never be able to be equal among them. So some scholars would say that verse abrogates the permission for polygamy, and so you can only have 1. That's not the prevailing view, though. The prevailing view among the scholars is that it's permissible for a Muslim man to marry up to 4 women at the same time. So polygamy, this restricted form of polygamy, is legal in many Muslim countries, including Egypt, Iran. It's not generally practiced, though. That's the other thing. Yeah, it's permissible, but it's not the norm. And that's kind of obvious just on sheer numbers. There's not enough women for every Muslim man to marry 2 wives or 3 wives and 4 wives. It's just not a reality. And when you consider the stipulations that families may entail, one of the terms that a Muslim woman can actually put in her marriage contract is that my husband may not take another wife. That's one of the things that she could add to her marriage contract to specify that. This is a polygamous family. So here's the groom, and he's got some daughters there as well. So I'm actually not sure which ones are his wives. Next, let's talk about funerals. So marriage is important, and funerals, of course, are important as well. The time in which you say goodbye to your loved ones, the members of the community. There are specific passages in the Quran, but more in the Hadith, about how a deceased Muslim should be buried, how the body should be treated. And of course, from country to country, there will be some variation there, some different cultural traditions, but there are some reoccurring features that you will typically find in Muslim societies. These include the washing of the body of the deceased. So when a Muslim dies, the body is traditionally washed, similar to the way in which one would perform ghusl, which is a full body ablution, a full purification of the body before doing prayer. Standard ablutions is wudu, the washing of the hands, the feet, the face. When you're in a state of great impurity, such as if a married couple has had sex, they need to perform a full body ablution before they can do their prayers and be in a state of purity. So you do a full body washing of the deceased. Then the body is wrapped in a white shroud, a white burial cloth. Then the body is prayed over. You have a funeral prayer. And then the body is buried in the ground. Now, according to the Hadith, the body should be buried before the sun sets twice on the body, so within 48 hours. So you want to have it done quickly, which is at odds with some modern practices, like here in the United States, where you have the body, put on, it might take a week or more before the body is actually buried. In the Sunni tradition, there are hadiths about the dead being aware of the grief of those at the funeral, and to avoid upsetting the spirit of the deceased, excessive crying, wailing, really emotional outpouring is strongly discouraged in Sunni Islam. So Sunni Islam has this kind of stoicism to it, right, of self-control, of self-discipline. But as we know in Shia Islam, it's different. I mean, just look at Ashura. There's this tremendous emotional outpouring in the Shia tradition. So in Islam, the body is expected to be buried because of the traditional belief that when the day of judgment comes, the body will be resurrected. And so the body shouldn't be burned unless absolutely necessary. So cremation is not the norm in Islam. Strongly discouraged, but necessity makes the impermissible permissible. That's a guiding principle in Islamic legal thought. So if, for example, let's say there was a plague, and bodies were piling up amidst the plague, and the bodies are still carry the disease, so it's contagious. Under certain conditions like that, you could say, all right, it's necessary that we burn these bodies because they're a public health threat. But otherwise, not permissible to burn the body. You're supposed to bury it with the idea that the body will be resurrected. When it comes to the grave itself, very conservative Muslims, citing specific hadiths, it's not in the Quran, but in hadiths, insist that a grave should be flat and there should be no elaborate statue or grave heading, nor a tomb or shrine over it. But as we've already seen this semester, there are these elaborate shrine tombs over the graves of saints, certainly of Shia imams. And so for some, such as the aforementioned Wahhabis in Saudi Arabia, that is haram. And when the Saudis came to power in Arabia and conquered Mecca and Medina, they went through Mecca and Medina and destroyed all these Muslim shrines and gravestones that were over the graves of major figures like Khadija, Muhammad's wife. Her grave is just a flat piece of dirt now, whereas before that, there was a whole shrine tomb over her grave. And the same is true of all these other people, Jafar al-Sadiq, Uthman. All these graves have been destroyed by the Saudis because they see it as a form of idolatry and a violation of the teachings of the Prophet and the Hadith that people would build grave markers. That said, the reason why the Saudis destroyed them in the 20th century is because Muslims had built them, right? Muslims had already built them, and that had been the norm for hundreds and hundreds of years. So as you travel around the Muslim majority world or visit a Muslim cemetery in a country like the United States, it's still very common to see the various types of headstones that you would find in any other graveyard or cemetery. So this one is in Morocco. This one over here is in Indonesia. You can see this one's a bit more conservative. It's flat. The headstone is very modest, low lying. So this is a bit more conservative than this, but even so, nothing too elaborate. When I went to Paris and I went to some old Catholic, like most people in France are Catholic, and some of the headstones there were like works of art. I mean, huge statues of angels and all kinds of stuff, really elaborate, but that is not the Islamic tradition, that's for sure. Here we have a cemetery in Egypt, and you can see these flat, simple graves, but here are some older, this is probably from like the Mamluk period, maybe Ottoman period. These more elaborate shrines here, but generally these flat graves. This is from a Muslim cemetery in Finland, right? Yeah, it's in Finland. And so you can see how, even though this is in Finland, that we have headstones with this symbol that becomes associated with Islam of the crescent, and then Arabic calligraphy decorating the headstones. So you see these varieties in different Muslim countries. Another topic I want to mention briefly in this wide-ranging lecture today is adoption. So if you read the story of the Prophet Muhammad, you would think that adopting orphans would be a really big, important thing in Islam, because Muhammad was an orphan. Muhammad's father died before he was born, and his mother died when he was 6 years old. So he found himself as this vulnerable orphan who for 2 years was in the care of his grandfather. His grandfather died, and then this orphan was then given to an uncle. Right? So you would think that, geez, given the experiences of Muhammad, adoption would be something that must really strongly be encouraged in the Islamic tradition. And in fact, we're told in the seerah, the story of Muhammad, that when he got older, he adopted a slave boy named Zaid as his son. And Zaid even used to go by the name Zaid ibn Muhammad, Zaid, the son of Muhammad. So Muhammad was an orphan, and he adopted an orphan as his son. So you would think, based on the Sunnah, Muslims should adopt orphans, right? Well, something in Medina happened that changed this. According to Muhammad's teachings and prevailing norms, a man may not marry the ex-wife of his son, right? That he couldn't marry his former daughter-in-law. But what happened in Medina was that a woman named Zainab had joined Islam and then gone to Muhammad in search of a spouse. Right? She wanted to get married. Now, she came from a high-standing community. She was what we could describe as a noble woman, a woman coming from wealth and prestige. And Muhammad had this adopted son named Zaid, who came from low standing, right? He had been a slave. So Muhammad suggested that she marry Zaid, his adopted son. Now, there were reservations on the part of both parties, but ultimately they agreed to the marriage. The marriage was unsuccessful, though, and it resulted in divorce, I think after just 2 years. So after that, this woman who had been married to Zaid, Muhammad's adopted son, returned to Muhammad and said, okay, well, that marriage didn't work. I still need a spouse. And at that time, Muhammad offered her to marry him and become one of his wives in Medina. And she agreed to that. So she became one of Muhammad's wives. So the fact that Muhammad now married this woman who had been married to his adopted son had been forbidden because of the perception that an adopted son was the same as a biological son. When that happened, Muhammad clarified that an adopted son is not the same as a biological son. From that point on, then Zayd wasn't called Zayd ibn Muhammad. He was Zayd ibn, I can't remember what his biological father's name was. And based on that, Muslim jurists over the centuries have forbidden adoption in the sense that we think of it today, where under the law, an adopted child would be the same as your biological child. Under Islamic law, that type of adoption is forbidden. Why? Because of that story with Zayd and Zainab and their marriage. And that's rooted in a revelation of the Quran. So adoption in the conventional Western sense is considered by the ulama to be haram, forbidden. But caring for orphans is still something that's very pious, right? Muhammad had been an orphan, Zayd was an orphan. So caring for orphans, really good. Being a foster parent, caring for orphans, really good. But adoption in the sense that under the eyes of the law, the orphan becomes equivalent to your biological child, that is sadly forbidden according to traditional formulations of Sharia. In modern Islam, there have been various attempts to change this. In Tunisia, for example, they did away with that law. And I think Habib Bourguiba, who was the president, I think he actually adopted a daughter to show, but he also did a lot of other bad things as well. But I think he adopted a daughter as well. And so there have been some challenges to that. But yeah, unfortunately, the ruling is against adoption. Divorce. So divorce, we already talked about divorce a little bit. Divorce is permissible under Sharia according to the ulama. But as I mentioned before, divorce, if you can avoid it, that's a good thing. And Muhammad himself never got divorced. Even at a time in Medina where he had some problems with his wives in Medina, they were sort of backbiting and plotting against each other. And he said, look, if you want a divorce, I'll give it to you. I'm going to go away. So he actually went off by himself for a while. So when I come back, if you haven't settled this and you still want a divorce, I'll grant you a divorce. Right? But this can't go on any further. But he never actually got divorced. So they managed to work it out. So Muhammad didn't get divorced, and divorce is discouraged, but divorce is also just the reality, right? Some people just can't be together anymore. So it happens. Now, among the Arabs, this is before you have bureaucracy and contracts and all that sort of stuff, courts and so forth. Among the Arabs, in this patriarchal society, a man could just declare that he was now divorced. And this is the method of talaq. Talaq means basically, I divorce you. And so a man would just make this declaration 3 times, and in the eyes of the community, that ended the marriage. Well, that practice continued on into Islam. So in Sunni Islam, talaq can be used. In modern Islam, you have formal court proceedings that can occur, but this traditional method of divorce still exists in various parts of the Muslim world today. The wife, however, cannot use that method. The wife has to go through a more bureaucratic channel to petition the legal authorities, petition the court to get a divorce, whereas the man has the privilege of just making that declaration and ending the marriage. In Sunni Islam, the ideal is that you're not going to say that in an emotional state, that you should be of your senses when you do it, right? That all actions are judged by intentions. So you don't want to just rattle that off 3 times when you're in a fight with your spouse. And for that reason, some Sunni jurists emphasize that you should spread them out, right? You can't just say them back to back. And that's the Shia position as well, that talaq can be done, but I think it's like a month has to pass between declaration. So you can't just say, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you, and end the marriage. My last topic here, this video clip doesn't work, but I wanted to talk about homosexuality in Islam as well. So Islam inherits the attitude towards homosexuality that you find in the Bible. So homosexuality, according to the ulama, traditionally is haram, and the attention is mainly geared towards men. There's less attention given to women in this matter. So sodomy in itself is forbidden, and that applies to heterosexuals as well. But really, just like other societies and other religions, the whole idea of sexual orientation is something that people are really just grappling with and rethinking right now. You know, I was born in 1978, so I'm 42 now, and I would tell you that the changes in attitudes towards the LGBTQ community, well, just the fact even that phrasing is used today, the changes in attitudes towards homosexuality in the United States over the last 20 years is dramatic. I mean, when I was a kid, I mean, people just like didn't talk about it. If they did, it was only in an insulting way, and people hid it and all these types of things. So if that's a change, a transformation that I've seen in society just in my lifetime here in the United States, I mean, going back into history, attitudes towards homosexuality are quite backwards, should we say, to the point in which people are being put to death because of their sexual orientation. And of course, that idea of executing homosexuals is something found in the Bible as well. So historically, Jews and Christians and Muslims have had very hostile attitudes towards members of the LGBTQ community. The Quran has a couple of verses talking about the people of Lot, so the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. And those verses are understood traditionally to be in reference to homosexual behavior. And so that's why those cities are destroyed. That's really all the Quran has to say about it. The Hadith provides some more material. In fact, there's even Hadith, this doesn't have to do with sexual orientation, but even condemns men who dress like women or women who dress like men. There's actually a specific Hadith that condemns that. So Muslim societies have had a hostile attitude towards homosexuality. And just like other religions, Christians, Jews are now grappling with homosexuality. That is going on in Muslim societies, but definitely more so in like the American Muslim community, more so than, for example, like the Egyptian Muslim community. Those discussions are not happening at anywhere near the level that they're happening here in the United States, where, of course, it's a wider discussion happening. So the idea of, for example, gay marriage, according to the ulama, that would be absolutely forbidden, right? That's just not even something to be considered. But I will say that among liberal Muslims in countries like the United States, I am aware, for example, of an American imam who is openly gay and has officiated gay Muslim weddings. So that's not the norm. You wouldn't see that in other parts of the Muslim world, but it has occurred. It's something that is something in modern Islam, but not traditionally. All right, so I'm going to conclude there. You have your response paper that is due by the start of class on Thursday, and I also want you to read that PDF in preparation for my discussion of the gunpowder empires, which are the Ottoman Empire, the Safavid Empire, and the Mughal Empire on Thursday. Thank you very much. For those of you who had technical problems, check the recording of this. That'll be saved on YouTube. I suspect the recording will probably be okay, but I'll have a look. All right. Thank you very much. See you later.